Yo, what's up guys, it's Alex Jerome, and today we're going to talk about how you can make professional sounding big fat bass lines like Martin Garrix, Martin Solveig, Oliver Heldens, Mesto, Mike Williams, all the big guys basically. I'm going to show you how to make a nice big professional bass line. This question was brought to me by one of my students in my boot camp named Rita. We've been going over bass lines and atmospheres and really cool things that these big professional house producers do. And so I wanted to pass some of the knowledge that I'm given to her. I wanted to pass it on to you guys and show you how to make some nice big bass lines. But before we get into that, I do want to mention that we got the coolest, best Discord ever for producers. You can hit up my Discord. It's the Hitmaker Group Discord, and there's a link in the description of this video where you can join the Discord and network with like-minded producers just like yourself. You can network with producers, talk to them, have fun with them, and yeah, it's just a good time in that Discord. It's a very active Discord too. A lot of people talking in there, so go hit up that Discord. I've been hanging out in there as well. It's a good time. So let's go ahead and get into this. This project here is a little project I've been working on. I didn't want to leak it before it was finished because it's not like a very big producers don't do that. But oops, we're gonna leak it. But we're gonna work in the drop here, and we're gonna dissect the bass. I'm gonna show you how I made the bass and how to layer bass because it's very important. And I'm also going to talk about where you can get bass sounds and where you can get good bass sounds. All right. So 3 things that I want to go over is how to layer bass, where to get bass sounds, and where to get good bass sounds. That's hilarious. It's like these 2 questions are like the same thing. But anyway, let's get to it, guys. I didn't want to leak this, but I guess you'll get a little leak here. All right, so we have a little drop there. Sounds really cool. Really big, and the size of that drop, you owe it all to the bass line because the bass line rhythmically follows that melody really well. So how does this bass line break down? Well, when you're making a bass line, there's 2 parts to a bass. There's the high bass, which I like to call the character bass because it's the part of the bass that you actually hear. And then there's the part of the bass that we call sub bass. Sub bass is a bass line that sits down in this area of the EQ that has to be uninterrupted because it's such a low frequency that you can't have multiple instruments down here. A good sub bass range is in between 50 hertz and 100 hertz. And so my sub bass sounds like this, and we're going to watch it take up this range down here. We had one that went a little high, but that's okay because we put that note up an octave just for variation in the sub. But generally, my notes are going to sit in this area. So the best way to make the bass, any bass for that matter, is to think about what your song sounds like. There's one case where you can use a bass line like an 808, like in a trap song or a hip hop song where you're not actually going to layer your bass with a high character bass because the 808 is so big that it could take up that range. But in songs like house music and future bass, most of the time you're going to layer your bass if there's no 808 in there. And the reason for that, like I said, is so that you can add some sort of character to that bass. So I like to pick the high bass first so I know what I have to do when it's time to layer a sub bass under it. So that was the bass that I landed on, I actually had another option up here. And so what you have to do when you come up with a bass like that is you then have to layer it with a corresponding sub bass to make it more powerful. So let's say I take this sound here as my high bass. By default, it sounds like this raw. Now, some people might say, well, Alex, it's already deep enough. Why do we have to layer sub bass on there? Because look, it's actually pretty deep. There's a nice sub region of this bass line here. Why would we have to layer a sub bass there to make it to do whatever? Well, the sub bass part of any sound isn't going to be a good, solid, consistent sub bass. It's actually going to be a lot of the times very loose and inconsistent, and then it also makes it harder to compress a sound like this because when you compress a sound into sub bass, sometimes you lose that sound. So a good idea would be to keep your sub basses different than your high basses, because it gives you more control over how you can edit the sub bass and the high bass. So this sound, for any sort of bass sound, I like using good, reliable presets. Sometimes I make my own in Serum or Sylenth, but I can get a better sound if I just use a preset, because presets are made by professional sound designers. And a lot of the times you could get more inspiration by using somebody else's preset, as long as you manipulate it a little bit. So I used this Nexus preset for this pluck sound. That's actually very easy to make in Serum, very easy to make in Sylenth. Go through my videos, find out how to make a EDM pluck. I have tons of videos. That is basically what you're hearing here. Only reason I use the Nexus one is because it sounds slightly different. There's a little bit more character in here that I'm not used to using, because I always end up making my own. But all I really did to this sound was turn off the delay and reverb, because you do not ever want delay and reverb on your basses. If you make a bass line with delay and reverb on it, or just reverb or just delay, you're going to get a really muddy bass line that's really difficult to listen to. So I advise you not to use delay and reverb on your basses. Make sure they're bone dry. Only put reverb on your leads and everything above your lead. So once you get your notes laid out, my notes look like this. You need to layer some sub bass underneath of it. But you can't just throw sub bass underneath it. You have to open up an EQ on this high bass, this character bass. This is the bass we hear, and sub bass is the bass that we feel. So what we need to do is we need to EQ the sub bass out of this pluck, because this is dirty, inconsistent sub bass. I don't want that to interrupt the real sub bass that I'm going to throw in. But look, when you take that stuff out, it doesn't even ruin the sound at all. And I'm actually going to dip this down a little bit too, because you can see it gets a little tall here. So I'm just going to dip that down a bit. And then you want to duplicate everything you have, like I just did there with the duplication tool up here. You want to take the same exact notes like this. And what I like to do is just turn off the EQ, because we don't need to EQ the low end out of this bass layer. We're going to call this the sub bass layer. Sub bass layer. And we got to find some sub bass. So you can use Nexus for sub bass. You can use Logic's Alchemy for sub bass. You can use Sylenth one for sub bass. And you can use Serum for sub bass. Let's use Serum. I actually like using Nexus's sub bass right now. I've been using so much Serum and Sylenth for the past year that I'm kind of like sick of them right now, and I'm all for Nexus 2 right now, which I haven't actually touched in years. I'm just crazy about it, so I'm going to keep using Nexus. But since most people use Serum, I'm going to show you how you can make a nice little sub bass layer for your bass layers. So let's go ahead. I turned off both oscillators, and I'm going to turn on the sub oscillator. Sub-oscillator just means the sub-bass oscillator, and you can pick whichever kind of sound wave that you want to use for the sub-bass oscillator. Sub-bass, like I said, has to be down in this range uninterrupted by any other instruments. And also, when you're picking a sound wave for sub-bass, you have to pick a wave that doesn't have any sharp edges. If you do have sharp edges, you're going to have to run it through a filter, and that makes everything really, really annoying. So we want to pick a nice round wave form because there won't be any extra associated noise with a round waveform. Sharp edges create high frequency noises, and we want a low frequency sound. So we're going to pick a nice round waveform. This is called a sine wave, and if we play it, this is what my notes sound like, and let's see what we're looking at down here. So it looks like it's already sitting in a good range, but it's kind of boring to listen to. There's not much going on. It's just kind of like just going. So I want to add a little bit of decay to this sound and make it sound more like it's supposed to be layer a pluck. So when you're making your sub bass layer your high bass sound, you want it to kind of follow the character of that bass sound. So in my case, I'm using a pluck. So I'm going to make my sub bass layer sound like a pluck. There we go. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up the attack because it's doing that clicky thing that I hate. And there we go. So now we have some movement there. It's not just a solid brick of bass. And of course, we have Nicky Romero's Kickstart. I have a student named Tyler who doesn't know much about sidechaining. And I take it a lot of beginners don't know much about sidechaining. What sidechaining is it adds that pump. So without sidechaining, this bassline layer would sound like this. So both the basses together, this is the sub bass with the high bass. Let's listen to what it sounds like. But we have to, because this is a house song, we have to add some sidechaining to it. And I'm going to use Nicky Romero's Kickstart plugin to help me do that. Listen to how it pumps now. And just like that, you have a beautiful layer of basses that will work well in whatever song you're working on. And just like that. And just keep your eye out for the song because I'm going to hopefully wrap it up this week and get it out for you guys to listen to. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Go make some big fat basses and share your bass lines and songs in the Hitmaker group Discord. Can't wait to see you guys in there. Peace out.